Never trust the new kid. Let me give you some background on the situation. My name is John. I'm 16 years old at the time of the event. In the middle of my junior year, I'm from Asian descent and am nearsighted, which means I can't see very far away, which is like a couple inches away from my face. It all started when I was in my homeroom. I'll call my teacher Mrs. S. Now, Mrs. S was a young woman in her 30s, but looked much older than she was. She taught history and I have her second period. First period just ended and I'm just getting into class. As I walk over to my seat, I see a skinny black-haired kid sitting there. "Are you the new kid?" I asked. "Yeah, name's Kyle." "Cool, name's John. I don't want to seem rude, but you're in my seat. Could you please move?" He gave me this face that a child makes when you don't give them what they want. He sat up and sat in the seat behind me. He reeked of someone who hasn't showered in a while. I take my seat and class begins. Mrs. S explains that there's a project we have to be due, and it's on famous landmarks and their purpose. This was a partner project, and lucky me, I was paired with Kyle. I thought not only was this going to give me a bad grade, but it meant that he had to come over my house, or I had to go over to his house. Obviously, I didn't want someone to come over to my house, nor did I wish to go anywhere for that matter. So I made a stupid decision, and decided to give Kyle my phone number. Everything was alright for the first couple days. Nothing was creepy, besides from the look he gave me a few days ago. Except for one afternoon, where me and him just finished writing. We both did 2 pages each, and we're going to pick out highlights from both of them and combine them together. This was a couple hours ago. My parents were out at dinner, and I was home alone playing some computer games when I heard what sounded like glass shattering from the basement, which was odd because I was on the 2nd floor. Being the coward I am, I decided to pause my game and listen. Not sure what to expect, I sat listening for a good 5 minutes before resuming my game. Another minute goes by and I hear the door to the basement open. I don't have any pets besides from the cat I have, which was on my bed at the time. I mute my computer and turn off the monitor, grabbing my phone to dial 911. This was on a landline installed to my room, which was my dad's office for some time. I quickly told the operator the situation, and she had dispatched an officer. I hear silent footsteps up the stairs. It felt like forever, which was only roughly 3 minutes. I hear sirens. I never felt so safe in my life. That was until my door slammed open. I couldn't see much, but only a mere silhouette of a figure. The sirens pass my windows with enough light for me to see the face of Kyle. He doesn't notice me, but he hides in the closet parallel to me. I've never been so scared in my entire fucking life. His facial expressions were the same from when I had told him to move out of my seat. It's roughly 30 seconds of utter darkness, besides some street lights glaring in through the window. The door slams open and a cop rushes, turns on the light and asks me if I'm okay. I scream my fucking lungs out, trying to explain he's in the closet while sobbing. He opens the closet and gets attacked immediately, but luckily he tases Kyle. I asked the cops why they arrived so fast on only suspicion, and he told me that the operator said she heard another phone click after I hung up. I handed in a project a week later because I took some time from school and stayed at my grandparents' house, so I got an A. So Kyle, let's never meet again. Note, I recently noticed my Facebook had my phone number and address on it. Needless to say, that's probably how he got my address, and without a doubt, I took both of them off and set my profile to private. Updates. I got off the bus and started heading to my front door. As I try to unlock it, to my surprise, it's unlocked. This is weird because my doors are always locked no matter what. I open the door and I see broken vases, moved furniture, smashed photos on the wall, and I think to myself, I just got robbed. As the thought of getting robbed flowed through my mind, I hear something that I'll never forget until the day I die. "Welcome home, buddy, I missed ya." I turn to the left and see Kyle, wielding a piece of broken glass and inching towards me with a creepy grin. I previously took some jiu-jitsu and tackled him to the floor. He stabbed my side and upper arm. I charge back my arm and punch his nose. I bolt out of there. I knock on my neighbor's door, not home. I try the next house. They let me in and call the cops. Kyle's out of the house bleeding, looking for me. He looks in the house adjacent to the one I'm in and breaks in. From there it's a blur because I passed out, but I awoke to sounds of multiple police cars and Kyle bleeding on the street. He was taken to a therapist and was deemed as showing psychotic traits. I wasn't cut deep enough to get stitches, but I am lucky just to be alive. Kyle, I hope I never see you in my life again. 200 pictures. The high school I attended was relatively small, maybe around 150 students back then. The dorm was even smaller, around 18 people. And it wasn't long before I found out that I would be rooming with Jacob for my first semester of 10th grade, something we were both hoping for since the summer. Not long after that, we met the other new dorm students and, of course, hazed by the old ones. During those first couple months, the new kids stuck together both in the dorm and at school. That is how I became friends with Harrison. Harrison was a big Chinese kid who was one grade below me in Jacob's class. He was one of the funniest people I've ever met, and he was an all-around nice guy. We would hang out all the time during school hours, and I really felt like I got to know him as the weeks passed. He was the type of kid you associate with the word weeb, an anime-loving, Japanese word-spouting, figurine collector type of kid. Once, I even went to his house, which was about 3 hours away from school, because I need to catch the train from that particular town. Our friendship didn't last long, however, and it had nothing to do with him. I just made other friends I had more things in common with. I would occasionally say hi to Harrison if I passed him in school, but I never really talked to him in the dorm anymore. My 10th grade passed, and Jacob and I became even closer friends, and in 11th grade, Mason joined our friend group. Although none of us talked to Harrison, we started to notice that he had become a lot more sluggish and depressed-like. Harrison's roommate would tell us about how he would never clean up after himself. Harrison would sleep on top of his dirty laundry and would not flush the bathroom, something that caused a lot of problems with his other 3 bathroom buddies. Our dorm parents having started problems with Harrison. He wouldn't show up for dinner, he'd often be late for school, and he never listened to authority. At one point, Harrison left the dorm for a while just to be with his family. Senior year and everything was much of the same with Harrison, until one specific night that got everyone in school talking. Jacob, Mason, and I were hanging out with our dorm mom when our dorm dad came into the room, a worried look on his face. "Where's Harrison?" he asked, quietly but clearly worried. We told him we didn't know, and he stared at the ground for a moment. "Stay with my wife." And with that, he went outside hurriedly. About 20 minutes passed before he came back to the dorm. He looked serious, which was unusual for him. After thinking for a second, he sat the 3 of us down and explained a little bit of the whole entire situation. Harrison was dangerous, and he needed to be found. He told us to stay with his wife, who was pregnant at the time, and to tackle Harrison if we saw him enter the kitchen. Up until that point, we didn't know what was going on, but we knew enough to stay up with our dorm mom. It must have been 11 p.m. when we saw Harrison enter the dorm. We eyed him as he went into his room and then out again. Our dorm mom was calling her husband quietly, as we observed. About 5 minutes later, our dorm dad, the girls' dorm dad, the dorm administrator, and the superintendent all rushed into Harrison's room. I stayed sitting next to our dorm mom, holding her hand as she quietly told us not to tell anyone at school. Jacob, Mason, and I started talking amongst ourselves. We had no idea why this was happening. All we knew was that Harrison was an unhygienic guy with mood issues. We eventually went to bed after my dorm mom had calmed down. The following night, our dorm dad held a meeting. He didn't really tell us anything, but he did tell us that Harrison was not coming back to the dorm. He also told us not to tell people at school. Everyone in high school was talking about it by the next week. Harrison eventually returned to school after a month of the incident, but because he wasn't allowed in our dorm, his parents rented an apartment near the school. I didn't see much of him after that, and I eventually graduated. I moved to the city where Jacob's family lived, so I kept in touch with him all the time. I wish the story ended here, but it, unfortunately, took an even more sinister turn. One morning, I got a phone call from Jacob's dad. He wanted to talk about something with me, something that had happened to Jacob. He told me that ever since the incident, the school administration had taken a closer look at Harrison's situation, eventually deciding to search his phone and his laptop. They found over 200 pictures of Jacob on his phone alone, along with some other disturbing images. Plus, they weren't pictures he had taken off Jacob's Facebook or anything like that. They were pictures Harrison had secretly taken. The weird thing was that Harrison never seemed to stalk Jacob, as Jacob himself related to me afterwards. Jacob, Mason, and I never suspected anything. Jacob's dad also told me that once they found the pictures, they took Harrison in for questioning. Harrison confessed that he had constantly fantasized about murdering Jacob, but it wasn't just murdered. He thought about slowly torturing Jacob, describing said torture in a meticulously graphic detail. Harrison had written about it hundreds of times in his notebook. Taking pictures of Jacob was apparently the way he fueled his imagination. I believe the night the three of us stayed by our dorm mom was the night he was going to carry out the murder. The exact details of why they let him back in school after that are not clear to me, but he was immediately expelled when they found out about the murder plot from his own mouth. Harrison had gone mad and we hadn't even noticed, or at least we hadn't made the connection. Jacob was in shock. He told me that Harrison planned to murder him because he felt like he, Jacob, was the dorm dad's favorite one. I mean, Harrison had such a messed up mind that he thought he would become the favorite if he killed Jacob. I understand that Harrison's parents might not have been the best parents in the whole world, but that in no way justifies how deranged his motives were. Jacob, Mason, and I were all very close to our dorm mom and dad. What if he had seen the three of us as potential targets? I was relieved he had been expelled, and that nothing awful had happened while Mason and I were still in school. Jacob is alright now. It's been a while since Harrison was expelled. For a time, his parents were worried because Harrison still lived in the same city, but I think those fears have died down since nobody has heard much about him. So, Harrison, I hope you get the help you need. But you were planning on murdering my friend, and I guess for that, let's never meet again. I once slept over at that token weird kid's house. This happened back in the summer of 9th grade, so I was invited to sleep over at this kid named Jacob's house. Jacob had this reputation for having a bad family, and just being weird and awkward himself. He was in my math class, and I was partnered up with him for a project, where I helped boost his mark, so I guess he sort of warmed up to me. For his birthday, he held a sleepover and invited 3 other kids and I to come. I didn't really want to go, but I told my friends about the invitation, and they convinced me to just go, saying it would be fun, and that I would figure out what kind of guy Jacob really was. I was hyped up by my friends, and decided to go after all. So I was dropped off by my mom, and when I stepped onto the porch, I realized that the doorbell looked broken. Like, the rectangular case that covered the wiring and stuff was shattered. I had a sudden fear of being electrocuted, so I went to knock instead. Just as I raised my fist, I noticed some muffled shouting from within the house, loud enough to be heard over the hum of my mom's car engine. The shouting kind of alarmed me, and I turned to look at the car, which was waiting for me to enter the house. I started having second thoughts of staying, but the idea of looking like a coward in front of my friends motivated me to knock loudly. The shouting cut abruptly, so abruptly that I thought they were just like watching TV or something like that, and muted it when I knocked. The door suddenly swung open, and I was expecting a huge looming figure to tower over me, but all I saw was a skinny, pale Jacob. His face brightened when he saw me, and he ushered me inside. I waved to my mom and watched her back out of the driveway and down the road. I peered into the house, but from the entrance, I could only see the living room, a staircase, and a hallway. All 3 areas were empty, but I saw the flickering light of a TV from the turn of the hall. Jacob took me upstairs into the very last room. It was an extraordinarily clean room, with a dresser and bed pushed together into the corner, and an analog clock hanging from the wall, leaving a lot of room completely empty. To my dismay, I was the first there. I thought of how awkward it would be if no one else showed up, and that would make me panic a bit. I sat down on the carpet and pulled my iPod Touch out of my backpack, asking Jacob to insert his Wi-Fi's password. He took my iPod and fiddled around with it for at least 5 minutes. Each minute grew longer and awkwarder, until I asked, "Did you forget the password?" Jacob bit his lips, and then the doorbell rang. I jumped to my feet and told him, "I'll get it. You just try and remember the password." I hurried down the stairs and opened the front door, where I saw a kid I didn't know very well. I only knew he was in our grade. I showed him upstairs, telling him, "Oh, I'm glad you came." I thought I'd be the only one, to which he said, "I wouldn't have come if my mother didn't make me." We walked into the room and noticed Jacob wasn't in it. I didn't think much of it, and took the opportunity to get familiar with the other dude. He told me that his name was Lance, and that he had once helped Jacob by giving him an extra few dollars to buy his lunch, and he didn't think Jacob would remember him. We both talked about the rumors about Jacob, and whether he actually had, bad parents or not, or he was just, going through a phase, you know? At some points, we heard loud thuds downstairs, to which we shut up and widened our eyes at each other. The thudding would stop, and after a few moments, we would continue chatting. I told him about the shouting, but how it could have just been the television. Lance shook his head and said he once saw Jacob with his parents in the grocery store, and that they had been arguing then too. At this point, I was glad I came, because I started to pity Jacob, and that's when he entered the room. "I'm sorry I'm late," he said, sounding out of breath. "I was trying to get the Wi-Fi password, but it's down right now. The Wi-Fi. Sorry." I told him it was okay, took my iPod from him, and told him that there was always something else we could do. We all waited for the two other boys that Jacob invited to come. It started to become apparent that they wouldn't, and I made up excuses for both of them after I saw the crestfallen look on Jacob's face. We awkwardly chatted for a bit, ate some chips, and talked about our schedules and stuff for 10th grade. He told us he would be moving away before September, and Lance and I asked normal questions to keep the conversations going. Then, after the small talk got tiring, we agreed to fall asleep early. We all brushed our teeth and changed. Then Jacob went to his bed, while Lance and I slept on the floor in our sleeping bags. After trying to sleep for what I thought was about 15 minutes, I just grabbed my iPod, turned the brightness down, and started to scroll through it. After I got bored with the games and such, I went to my messages and decided to read back on some conversations with my friends. That's when I noticed that on the top, where newly messaged people were, was an unknown number. Confused, I pressed on it, and was horrified to see a bunch of pictures that I had took of my friends and myself were sent to this number from my camera roll. All of them delivered. That's what it read, which meant I was connected to a source of internet for these to be sent. I could only think of Jacob as the culprit, and I got really freaked out because he had just sent my pictures to somebody, and I didn't remember Jacob ever having a phone. I didn't know what to do, so I shook Lance awake, keeping my eyes on Jacob's still form. It took Lance forever, but I managed to make him turn around and look at me through blurry eyes. In a whisper, I asked, "Can you come to the washroom with me?" Lance groaned and turned back around, muttering, "Don't be a pussy." I shook him violently and told him that he needed to come with me, and I annoyed him so much that he pushed himself out of his sleeping bag and hit me hard on the arm. I was so panicked I didn't care. I dragged him out of the room, opening every door in the hallway slowly, until I found the washroom. I shoved him in and locked the door, and he looked seriously freaked out. "What the hell are you doing?" he asked angrily, and I showed him my messages and explained the whole entire situation. He told me I must have butt sent it, but I told him that this was an iPod, and I couldn't send anything without Wi-Fi. Lance's angry look has shifted to look nervously excited now, and he assured me I was overreacting. "But we can call the number on your phone if you want," he said, and I thought that was a good idea. So Lance turned on his cellular data, and I dialed the number displayed on my messages. The ringing started a bit late, and then we heard the music of an incoming call coming in from one of the other rooms. It took a second for us to realize this, and when we did, we both went into a flurry of shocked nervousness. Lance muted the ringing on his phone and tiptoed out of the bathroom. We heard the ringing coming from one of the bedrooms as we tiptoed down the corridor, and we both shared a terrified look. When we went back into Jacob's room, he was sitting up on his bed and scratching his head. Lance quickly ended the call and nudged me, like I should have confronted him or something. Jacob asked us why we were awake, and Lance just looked at me, expecting me to answer. I told Jacob I had to go to the bathroom, and Lance was already awake, so I took him along. Jacob just kinda sat there, so Lance and I curled back into our sleeping bags. Neither Lance or I actually slept. We just turned our backs on each other and lay there, heavily breathing. Unsure of what to do about the situation, oddly I drifted off to sleep, and was awoken by Lance early in the morning. He let me call my mom, and I asked her to pick me and Lance up, since Lance didn't have a ride that early in the morning. We told Jacob goodbye, thanks for inviting us over and all that. I really wanted to say something about the messages to him, but I was really creeped out, and didn't want to make the whole thing awkward. He did move late August, and I never told my parents about this, only my friends. This happened about 3 years ago. I now have this weird paranoia of handing people my phone now, locked or unlocked. Some kid tried to lure my daughter. I'm using a throwaway account for this for obvious reasons. Basically, I want my daughter to remain anonymous. My daughter is 13 years old, and she and her friend were allowed to go off on their own at a really large amusement park a couple hours from where we live. I didn't have a problem with that. The parents she were with were people that I trust, and they're all good kids, and that she was going off with, so I don't really think anything could happen to her. I was wrong. She met a boy there. He told her that he was 16 years old, and him and her 2 other girls, started to hang out for the day. He immediately attached himself to her, getting friendly and flattering her. She thought he was cute, so everything was good in her mind. As the day progresses, he starts to encourage her to stay at the park instead of going home with her friends and their family. She says that no, she can't, because we are 2 hours away and can't come to get her. He persists, and when she refuses, he wants her to come the following weekend and meet with him again, alone. She comes home and tells us about this kid, and really, we didn't think that much of it until we realized a few things. He was at the park completely alone. I would have been to the park many times and never seen someone obviously alone there. People always come with someone else, especially a teen boy. We have no doubt that he would have been there with an adult watching him and waiting to see who he can lure away. He didn't have a cell phone, a Facebook account, email, or anything else of that nature. In fact, he had her create him a Facebook account so they could keep in touch, using her own email address. He snapped a photo of him, and he is not 16, I would say early 20s. He did everything that he could to convince her to leave her friends, stay late at the park, and go alone with him the next weekend. He said everything exactly right. He had her thinking that they had a good connection, as she had with their previous very innocent relationship that was with someone who ended up becoming her best friend while they were together. The kid was from the Eastern Bloc countries. He didn't have an accent, but if she called his house, whoever answered had a very thick accent and spoke in Russian or some similar language. Additionally, it was always a male that answered the phone, and male voices in the background. He lied to her about things in order to have her feel connected to him. I can't give specific details here. In the end, we are very confident that he was a recruiter for sex slavery or something of that nature. I'm not being a paranoid parent here. I know that it sounds like I am, but I am not the type to be really worried about their child and be like really overprotective, you know? My daughter is 13 years old and has looked 16 for a couple of years now. She blossomed early and has an hourglass figure. She is very attractive. The guy almost completely ignored her friends. One is pretty but a big girl, not heavy but big built and very tall, and the other is tiny, cute enough in her own way, and a very little girl in stature way, despite being the same age as my daughter. Everything points to the fact that I could have lost my daughter that day if she did not have a good head on her shoulders that day. If she had gone with him, I have no doubt that I would have never seen her again.